The Trumpet Daily Program begins right now.
Today's world news, what it means, where it's taking us.
I bring you the one and only possible message of world peace.
This is a message of hope, tremendous hope. And he said unto me, you must prophesy again.
The Trumpet Daily Program begins right now.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's Labor Day in the United States, and I'm privileged to guest host today's program. My name is Andrew Loker, and I'm coming to you from our Edmond campus. The last time I was with you, I had a cold. I was kind of sick, so I'm sorry for the presentation there, but feeling better today, although I just had a little coughing fit again. I'd like to thank Mr. Falk and his son Spencer for coming in today. It's early on a holiday weekend, and they were kind enough to come in to run today's program. It is really a great experience here on campus. Our young people do get to participate in a lot of very adult activities. Spencer is in there working hard, and it's not just a little fun day. So we appreciate the young people doing their part as well to help with this message. We did have a church picnic yesterday here on campus, a lot of games, some delicious food, and a moment to relax during a very busy time of year. I was told that the ministers lost 2 rounds of tug of war. And Mr. Fred Dadalow, the local pastor here, he had kind of really promoted this tug of peace, as he likes to call it. And I'm sorry I wasn't there. I wouldn't have been much help anyway. I have a sore shoulder, so I kind of begged out of that activity. But I'm sure Mr. Dadalow can rearrange for a rematch during the ministerial conference. We'll get all the ministers of the whole world, bring them all together and see if we can defeat the young people. The tug of war between the ministers was with all the kids in the church. Well, I can't say it's embarrassing because I wasn't there to help in the battle, but pretty surprising. I credit the PE program here at Imperial Academy for taking on the ministry. So it is Labor Day, and I went to the Department of Labor, and excuse me, this day is dedicated to the social and economic achievements of the American worker, and I think we all probably understand that. We are really a blessed nation, and we are blessed to have work to go out and perform. And yet, on this Labor Day, there are millions of workers who would like to be working more. I'd like to quote to you from a report issued by the Department of Labor. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it's their monthly unemployment report. This is August 2020. The report says the unemployment rate fell to 8.4%, which is really great. These improvements in the labor market reflect the continued resumption of economic activity that had been curtailed due to the coronavirus pandemic and efforts to contain it. And so I'm going to talk a fair bit about the coronavirus early on here. But I think the interesting thing about this report are people are coming back to work. And yet, if you look at this press release from the report, it goes back to August 2018, and it carries through 2 years, obviously, to today. And you see all of the majority of the report, the unemployment rate hovered below 4%, excuse me. And it really very encouraging, very strong employment numbers. People need to work. People thrive when they work, not just economically, but mentally it's stimulating. It does help bring families together, as we'll talk about. There's quite a few benefits to work. And so you see just this very low unemployment rate, just very steady. And all of a sudden, of course, it spiked when the government shut down the economy. It wasn't COVID that shut it down. It was the choice of men. And yes, COVID did contribute to that decision, of course, but you see this spike up to it's just probably just shy of 15% unemployment within a matter of, I think, about 30 or 40 days. It went from 4% all the way that high. This report continues, says in August, the unemployment rate declined by 1.8 percent points to 8.4 total. And the number of unemployed persons fell by about 3 million, down to 13.6 million people that are currently unemployed. Both measures have declined for 4 consecutive months, but are higher than the February average that they had there. So really good news in a lot of ways on the recovery. It's obviously downplayed by the liberal media. They do have to report on things like this, and yet they always do so with great caution, and it is still pretty alarming to see what we did to ourselves. Let's see here. I wanted to draw attention to this. It said in August, the number of permanent job losses increased to 3.4 million. This measure has risen by 2.1 million since February. And so over 2 million jobs permanently gone. Permanently gone because of the government shutdowns of the economy. It is having a serious impact. Now, people are coming back to work, which is great, but it's obviously a very tenuous situation out there. This talks about the people that usually work full-time and part-time. I'll skip that. It said that in August, the number of persons not in the labor force who currently want a job declined to 7 million. So again, things are getting better. There are some jobs out there if people want them. This history of the Labor Day from the Department of Labor, it talks about just how strong the workforce is. And again, we know God bless Abraham for his obedience. I looked at the CIA fact book for 2017, and they said in the United States, we had 160 million people in the labor force. It's the fourth largest in the world. Pre-COVID days, right before the pandemic hit, we had 159 million in the workforce. The low point in April, we had dropped our workforce down to 133 million people. And today, again, as I've just talked about, it's rebounded to about 147 million. And so you see a lot of people out of work, and yet a lot of people that are starting to come back. So that's good news in many ways. In Business Insider on July 22nd, they had a report. I wanted to draw attention to the fact that it's not just job losses. Obviously, there's other repercussions. There are other losses out there, businesses in particular. From Business Insider, July 2020, it said more than half of all coronavirus-related business closures since March are now permanent, according to Yelp data. And so running surveys, not just on the labor force, but of course the impact on small businesses and even on some larger businesses. Last week, there was a number of thousands of people being laid off from this business or that business. Really a difficult situation. This Business Insider report said permanent closures are the highest in the restaurant industry, which was one of the first and hardest hit by sweeping shutdowns that began in March to curb the spread of COVID. It says of all the restaurants closed in July, 60% have been permanent closures. 60% of those businesses, family dreams perhaps, of owning their own restaurant. Some of the restaurants, pretty notable, had been around for quite a while, couldn't survive this shutdown. Other newer businesses obviously closed. I was driving through town the other day, and obviously there's construction just about everywhere, especially pre-COVID time, and you see these new businesses opening. And when those businesses open right before a shutdown like this, I look at them now and it looks like they're already closed. They probably never got a chance to open and invest money. It just didn't work out for them. I'd like to quote to you, this is a pretty interesting thing to think about. This is from yesterday's Fox News. I think it was off their business website. But the title is Hilton Hotel in New York City's Times Square to close as coronavirus devastates tourism. It says the hotel industry is struggling amid COVID concerns. It may be located at the crossroads of the world, but the Hilton Times Square Hotel in New York City will shutter in October, another sign of how the coronavirus pandemic has left lasting impacts on the travel industry. This isn't just a little hotel. This hotel in New York City, 478 rooms. Now, that might not mean a whole lot to you, but maybe this will. It says the hotel was built in 2000, and it's 44 stories tall. It's in Times Square. That is probably one of their premier properties. A 44-story building just shut down, not because of sickness, but because mankind makes decisions to shut things down. Now, again, they have reasoning behind it. I'm not saying that the COVID doesn't have something to do with that. But here you're closing down these major hotels in major cities. How many jobs will that cost? This article says Hilton Worldwide Holdings said last month that it expected to take at least 2 years for the hotel chain to rebound from the coronavirus pandemic. That's the whole chain. All the Hilton hotels around the world, they're hoping that it's maybe a 24-month period before they can kind of get back to business. They said this hotel will likely reopen, but they don't know exactly when. And then it just talks about how difficult it's been in New York City. So the hospitality industry takes a blow. Travel takes a blow. Just the general workforce is really staggering from these shutdowns. Ironically, I read an article about the Airbnb industry, and they said it's just absolutely booming right now. Airbnb is where individuals rent out their homes, or they lease them out for periods of time. And the reason why it's doing so well is everybody's anticipating another lockdown this winter, or they're already living through that. And so the new trend seems to be people will go to beach houses. They'll rent in like a beautiful natural setting, holiday destination type of thing, and they'll rent those places to work there because they're working from home, and employers are paying for those rentals. Social distancing, after all. So it's good for the Airbnb industry, but think of the impact on commercial real estate, on the skyscrapers that we see. Very expensive real estate, and probably too expensive to renovate to accommodate the proper social distancing that they're asking for. And so we're just seeing these ripples go through the economy, and they're significant. A lot of money involved, a lot of people involved. It reminds me of a prophesied future that's coming in Micah chapter 4. And verse 4 it says, "But they shall sit, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Eternal has spoken it." Prosperity. Every man will have his own tree, his own space, and nothing shall make them afraid. Not social distancing, not rioting. It's a prophesied time of prosperity. What's interesting is just the space that we have that's prophesied. Verse 5 says, "For all people will walk, everyone in the name of his God, and we will walk in the name of the Eternal our God forever and ever." I mean, what a future. God will be there. God's future doesn't have us crammed in cities. Rather, we're spread out with some space and a lot of figs, apparently. A lot of fig trees out there. I'm not a big fan of figs, so I'm anxious to see if I can choose a different tree. But I'll probably end up liking figs at that time. So here God prophesies of a very, very different society. If you have your own property, it insinuates you'll have your own responsibility to maintain and uphold and improve. And of course, the mental benefit that provides is really, really stimulating. These are inspiring verses. And at the end of today's program, we'll have a little bit of a Bible study talking about the prophesied end of this present evil world. Just a few other COVID side effects and their new projections. The world is obviously grappling with how to return to work, trying to get back to normal, and yet maintain the face coverings and all the distance that they need. And you could just sense the frustration. If you look at pictures from this holiday weekend, the beaches are crowded without social distancing, without masks. People are just, they've got to get outside. They need a break from this. The media, the political hype. We've talked about this before, but that it's just stirring up this anxiety. There are side effects on the health beyond just the economy. You think about even Nancy Pelosi's issue, just the hypocrisy that's out there. There's anger. Mr. Stephen Flurry has talked about before, many others have talked about as well. The cure has been much worse than the illness. Evidence is around us every day. The next few weeks, I think, will be pretty interesting to see as schools get back into session. I know a lot of schools have started, but most of the schools, at least in this area, started with an online experience. waiting until mid-September to transition back to brick and mortar, or they have some kind of a hybrid of online and brick and mortar. And so I think the next few weeks we'll see how that plays out. Probably won't be that bad for sickness. They've already proven that fact, that that's not the age group at risk outside of maybe the teachers and administrators. And so there's concern about it. There are rules in place. Northeastern University sent 11 students home for violating COVID restrictions on social distancing. Those kids lost a lot of money, and there'll probably be some lawsuits that come out of this. There are mask mandates, social distancing, partial shutdowns, prolonged periods of time. All of this hysteria that's out there, all of this hype, I can't help but to just kind of people watch as I go into different locations. I was in a store just the other day, and I forgot my mask, went back to the car and got it, and came back and went in the store. And I saw 3 or 4 people inside the store without masks, and it kind of made me mad. I'm like, well, I don't want to wear mine. If he's not wearing his, why do I have to wear mine? I almost took it off, but I thought, well, I don't want to stir things up here. But if you watch the news, it doesn't happen everywhere all the time, but I would imagine just about every day there's some type of a scuffle, some type of a argument between individuals or those that are wearing masks and those that aren't. How many reports go, or interactions go unreported, I should say? How often are people kind of at odds with one another? Sometimes a pretty militant confrontation between both sides. People have lost their lives over mask wearing. I live in Edmond, Oklahoma, and we have this citywide mandate that requires face masks to be worn. It's going to be in effect for 6 more weeks. Now, there was a spike in Oklahoma in the confirmed cases, and surprise, surprise, there was also a spike in testing around the same time. Oklahoma did see a slight increase in the average daily death toll. Our state, the state of Oklahoma, has 4 million residents. And we average about 5.5 to 7, depends on which source you look at. Between 5 to 7 people a day die on average in Oklahoma. 850 total deaths now out of 4 million. And those deaths, those 850, that's what they attribute to COVID. How accurate that is, I don't know. I did look at some other statistics. I know we all talk about this, but I think it's good to think about it again. The COVID death rate, say it's 7%, the high that I saw posted for Oklahoma right now. In 2019, the average deaths per day for accidents or injury deaths, same thing, 7 a day. So you're about as likely to die from an accident or some type of injury you suffer as you are from COVID. There are people dying, and I'm not diminishing that whatsoever. But I think we have to balance this. We've all had the argument or the discussion about, well, we don't stop people from driving. We don't, shut down the economy and lock people in their homes to prevent injury. We have to live. We have to be out and productive. We have to do things. This was a little shocking to me. I looked at a 2017 survey from CNN, and they talked about the 5 states with the highest death rates overall, and Oklahoma made the top 5. So Oklahoma doesn't have the best reputation for health. And the 5 lowest states for death rates, guess who's in there? New York. Now remember, this is from 2017, so you're pretty safe in New York, that is, unless you live in a nursing home with Governor Cuomo's leadership. Then it could be a little bit more risky. Sorry, just throwing out a little fact there. In 2017, the leading cause of death, the leading causes were heart disease, cancer, chronic lower respiratory disease, unintentional injuries, and stroke. I looked at the CDC causes for death in Oklahoma, and it's pretty much the exact same thing that I read there. Heart disease. The heart disease death rate in Oklahoma is 6 times higher than COVID. Accidents, again, it's about the same. Maybe you're a little bit more likely to die from an accident. And actually, there's about the equivalent number of people that die from Alzheimer's-related disease side effects, or however Alzheimer's takes a life. Well, that's about the same number of people dying from that as from COVID. And so you can look around, and and know that there's a number of ways that we can suffer, obviously. But all of this focus on COVID is kind of exhausting. You probably noticed the headlines that the liberal media especially are promoting. This is from Reuters, and I believe this is yesterday. It says U.S. coronavirus deaths projected to more than double to 410,000 by January. So, of course, it's all of the media pressure now that it's going to get much worse between now and January, more than doubling the total deaths. U.S. deaths from coronavirus will reach 410,000 by the end of the year, more than double the current death total, as deaths soar to 3,000 per day in December, according to this University of Washington Health Institute forecast. It says deaths could be reduced 30% if Americans wore face masks, as epidemiologists have advised, but face mask wearing is declining. It's all our fault. We're not wearing our face masks, and they know 30% fewer people would die if we would just put on our face masks all the time. So this model, they cite the fact it's been used by the White House. They didn't say that it is used. It has been. Probably realized that it was a little bit outrageous. This report says it would more than triple the current death rate of 850 a day. So think about that. There's 850 people dying a day now. It's September, and this report would have us believe by January it could be as high as 3,000. Actually, it says in December. I looked at the CDC. They have all kinds of tables and updates of how many people die, and this is it was updated on September 4th. And the worst week for deaths in the United States was April 18th, or the week that ended April 18th. And there were 17,036 people that were reportedly dead from COVID. That's 2,433 a day. So the very peak in the United States, 2,400. They're projecting now that we're going to get to 3,000 a day. That seems a little bit of a stretch to me. It says the model's outlook for the world was even worse. I won't get into all that. And then again, just right back to Americans are still refusing to wear masks. There remains an extraordinary opportunity to save lives, but I guess nobody seems to care. It says mask use continues to decline from a peak in early August. And listen to this. This is how they end their story. It's all this gloom and doom, and it's going to get so much worse, and shame on all of you for not wearing your mask. It says, although U.S. infections have declined to about 45,000 a day from its peak of around 70,000 a day in July, it says infection rates have also recently fallen in large states such as Texas, Florida, California, leading to the national decline in cases. They don't focus on the decline. They don't suggest that perhaps we're past the difficult stage. I know they don't know. I don't know how bad it's going to be. Maybe it will get to be that bad. I don't know. But it seems like a lot of fear-mongering, a lot of effort to scare people into wearing their masks. Rather alarmist. And so you see these downward trends. They can't hide the data. I mean, I know they probably manipulate the data, but people know. People know it's not as deadly as it was before, perhaps. And it's just frustrating that they don't report on the decline. They just talk about what could happen. They continue to ignore the problems associated with COVID restrictions and lockdowns at home. Our producer here, Mr. Falk, passed on this story to me. This is from CNN, September 4th. The headline is 52% of young adults in the U.S. are living with their parents. That's the highest share since the Great Depression. The report talks about it just being across every category, gender, ethnicity, age group. And again, it's talking about young people, I think ages 18 to 24. Over half are living at home with mom and dad. And while that really shouldn't be a problem, mentally speaking, or for people's mental health, when you look at all of the other studies and the problems that are being reported, you see that it's actually leading to death. Mental health problems. Why can't people live together? Families. What is the problem out there? Is it just selfishness? Are they too carnal? Are they too far away from God? a report which Mr. Stephen Flurry talked about last week. I won't get into too many details. This is again from Fox News, September 2nd, so about a week old, I guess. It says U.S. divorce rates skyrocket amid COVID pandemic. It said the data showed that 31% of couples admitted lockdown has caused irreparable damage to their relationships. 31%, about a third of the people are asking for a divorce from the courts. They're going to go through all of that financial difficulty, all of that strain. A third of the marriages are damaged now, irreparably, they say, because they're locked together. I made the point the other night, if you look back to when the time right before they got married, that's all they wanted to do was to be together. That's all what we normally want to do. We want to be together. And yet it's causing all of this damage. This article says interest in separation during the quarantine peaked on April 13th, just about 15 to 20 days into when the vast majority of states began lockdowns. Interest in separation. It only took 2 weeks from being locked down before everybody started to think, you know what, this is just terrible. I need divorce. I need to get out of this marriage relationship. Marriage, as we teach, is a God-plane relationship. And so when they're actually asked to come together, you would think it would strengthen. That would provide some comfort and solace. To the contrary, it's tearing families apart. From our local newspaper, the Daily Oklahoman, this is the end of August 30th. Survey finds many Oklahoma school children have suicidal thoughts. This survey was conducted prior to the COVID lockdown. This article says COVID-19 has caused job losses and increases in family strife, domestic violence, and substance abuse, all of which are risk factors tied to suicide. And it just tells a terrible story of the impact of these lockdowns on children at home. Marriages. What are we doing to ourselves? Just stop and think about that. What are we doing? It's so illogical. People are out of work. The businesses are closing. Just going out and enjoying life and having a Labor Day weekend. We're just crawling into our holes. And when we get in the holes, all it does is separate and divide and cause all of these problems. Why are we doing this to ourselves? The more appropriate question is, what is Satan doing to mankind? Satan hates family. Satan loves fear. He loves anger and confrontation. He loves laziness and a welfare type of society. It's not too hard to see who's really behind the COVID hype and hysteria, and he's hugely effective. Hugely effective. One final series of thoughts regarding COVID, and this relates back to the economy, and it speaks to selfishness. If you remember back early on in the lockdown, the government, at least in the United States, sent out these stimulus checks to families, and they were trying to prop up people that didn't have income, that had bills to pay. But the intention was mostly to create spending. They wanted spending to take place in families. I think I lost my the article that I wanted to get to. I'll probably find it here in just a moment. But I found this study that looked into, well, how did people spend that first check? Because the U.S. economy thrives on consumer spending. That's what keeps everything moving. And the government knew if that spending wasn't happening in restaurants and in travel, that a lot of people's jobs were at risk. And as it turns out, and I'm just going to have to go off memory here, I think only about 25% of those relief checks were spent in the economy like they wanted. A high percentage were saved, and I have to applaud that. Others used to pay down debt. And again, I think that's a good use. But anyway, they're talking about spending or issuing another round of relief. I'm way behind on my notes here, so I'm going to just paraphrase a few of these things. This article here from the Congressional Budget Office They reported on the special funds like Social Security, the Highway Trust Fund. The government's tapping into these funds because they need cash. They're spending money like crazy. And so they're grabbing money from the highway fund for the future. So we won't have funds there to repair the highways that have been saved from gas taxes and this kind of thing. They're stealing, obviously, from Social Security, Medicare, these trusts that they're tapping into to hand out money. We're spending our future. This other article, this is from Deficit Tracker. The website is bipartisanpolicy.org. And it's just an article about, is anybody paying attention to the deficit, to the national debt? Obviously, they're not. Let me see if I can just, they're just talking about the staggering numbers, the differences. Says the Congressional Budget Office reported that federal government ran a deficit of $864 billion in June. This monthly deficit is more than 100 times larger than last June's deficit of $8 billion. 100-fold increase year to year. Just this month compared to the same month in the previous year, 100% higher deficit. It talks about numbers in the trillions. And you start to look at those things and we cannot continue on this way. This is pretty scary. What happens when the money runs out and printing money just leads to terrible problems? And what's interesting is you look at the presidential election now, you look at this debate, which I'll talk about, giving another round of stimulus checks. Well, it's very popular because people want money. They want a $1,200 check. I want a $1,200 check. I still got some human nature in myself too. And of course, it just sounds great to get these free handouts, but nobody's thinking about the future. That's the problem here. This article from Fox News from September 6th, you can go back and find it. It explains the discussion. I'll use that term. It's not really a discussion, but it's between Mr. Mnuchin and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, and they're talking about this controversy they've been talking about for 8 weeks now, or more actually, about another round of stimulus. And the Democrats won't budge unless the White House commits to another $2.5 trillion of spending. That's just unthinkable. And it's all related to COVID relief, beside all their special projects. It isn't a request for $2.5 trillion to upgrade the military, to rebuild schools. No, this is to hand out money. And this article, what's interesting about it is when you get to the end of it, it says Mnuchin said that President Trump will not allow Iran to acquire nuclear weapons or hurt American allies in the region. And I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but basically it talks about handing out checks to everybody in the United States. Meanwhile, if you look at the world, there are problems, there are rising powers that need to be confronted, but we don't have our eye on that. Really tragic. One final point that I just wanted to bring out. Mr. Richard Palmer passed on this news last week. It's just an interesting headline. It says, a month after the Beirut blast, the Lebanese army found another 4 tons of ammonium nitrate near the port. If you remember the pictures of that explosion, that huge explosion that I think all of us maybe when we first saw it considered like, wow, is that a nuclear explosion? And if you just look at the magnitude of that explosion, it was pretty similar to a nuclear explosion. That explosion that happened a month ago was with 3,000 pounds, or 3,000 tons, 3,000 tons of the volatile fertilizer. They found another 4.3 tons in containers down there by the port. Another 20 containers that had other dangerous chemicals. Look at this world. Look at what's going on. What do you think of all of this? What do we think? I mean, the world is in danger financially, militarily, politically, even with our health, fear, anxiety, mental stress. It reminds me of when the terrorists struck the World Trade Center, and it was a terrible situation for all the people trapped up above, right? There's disaster apparent below. Fire was catching up to them. It was like all of these problems catching up to us. And if you recall, and I won't get too graphic with this, but I think you remember there were a lot of suicides that took place during the World Trade Center attack because the people that were trapped above the fire, as the fire was inching closer to them, the better option was to jump out of a window and die that way. That was a better option. Are we in that kind of a situation now? When we come back from break, I want to talk about prophecy from Jesus Christ, the Olivet prophecy. We're all very familiar with it. And I also want to talk about some of the thoughts that are on Mr. Armstrong's mind in the last year leading up to his death. And one of the little booklets that he wrote, it's entitled A World Held Captive, a booklet that maybe we don't remember, but it makes a very important point, and we'll discuss that when we come back from the break.
This is KPCG FM, and this is the Trumpet Daily. Could anything be more mysterious than the question of the unseen spirit world? Angelic beings have always been a mystery to people on the earth. Do angels actually exist? Is there, in fact, a Satan, the devil? Is Satan a literal, immortal being? Did God create a devil? To understand more about the mystery of angels and evil spirits, be sure to request Herbert W. Armstrong's masterful work, Mystery of the Ages. To learn more, please visit thetrumpet.com. The Trumpet Daily.
Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in on this Labor Day, or if you're listening to a recording later on, we appreciate your listening. If you have any response, you can, or comments, thoughts, feedback, you can email that to td@kpcg.fm. I love hearing your comments. Mr. Stephen Fleury, I think, kind of ties us all together by reading your thoughts and comments. Well, I'm sorry that the first 35 minutes were gloom and doom, but it does really make a point. It's just hard not to have a negative outlook on life. It's hard not to be anxious and have a little fear. It's kind of a natural reaction to what we see around us. In Revelation 12 and verse 9, God tells us that Satan has deceived the whole world. And you couldn't find any more better evidence than what we just found. All of these self-inflicted problems were just deceived into exactly the scenario we find ourselves. And it's tearing apart families. It's causing men to rise up against other men. Satan has been cast to this earth. This is his world. This is his environment. He loves it. In Luke chapter 21 and verse 22, it says, "For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled." Right? This is a prophesied time. I'll pick up a couple more verses here, 26 through 28, or through 27. But think about what Christ is saying here. I think you know these prophecies well. Verse 26 says, "Men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken," right? And it says, "And they shall see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory." If you just think about what Christ was talking about here, and again, you can read this in Matthew 24 or Mark 13. There's slightly different wording, but you get the gist of it here. People's hearts are failing them. And how could they not when you look around? I saw more footage of individuals that went out for a nice meal on this holiday weekend only to have that meal interrupted, their tables overturned by protesters. They're just loving it. Wrecking somebody's life. What if that's their first meal they finally came out of their house to eat, and they are just basically encountering problems like this. It's chaotic. It's satanic. Now, as this prophecy points out, it all builds toward the return of Jesus Christ. Problems are difficult out there. There isn't a human solution. God gave us the Holy Day plan to prove to us that there is hope. But it's not hope in man. It's hope in God, right? It's the return of Jesus Christ. Mr. Armstrong wrote in this book, A World Held Captive, there's really two main things that we have to understand and really understand if we are to move forward with his plan. He asks, what is God doing? And the obvious answer, and the first thing we really need to understand, is God is recreating himself through mankind. That's an extraordinary thought to meditate upon. You have the potential to become God. That's your incredible human potential. God is working a plan, which is the second phase of this duality of knowledge that we need to have. God's recreated himself, and he has a plan, a well-designed plan to execute or to accomplish that seemingly impossible feat. He's turning us into God beings if we cooperate with him. It's a wonderful plan. And as you understand Bible prophecy, if you study our materials, you understand that this anxiety and fear and fighting and violence is all about to climax, and Jesus Christ will return to stop it, to bring in this new age of Micah chapter 4 that we read before, where there's prosperity and peace, cooperation, where families love being together. It's not that they want to separate or there's irreparable damage. They yearn to be together. The book of Revelation in chapter 10 and verse 6 tells us that we're in a time of no more delay. And you feel it around you, don't you? The urgency. Mr. Armstrong was really working hard to emphasize during the last year of his life a simple fact. This is Satan's world. Look around. This is Satan's world. People are acting irrationally. This isn't godly. God is a God of order. But mankind has chosen to live with their captor, as the booklet points out. They prefer Satan's world. They don't know really about God's world outside of our efforts on programming like what you're listening to now. More importantly, the Key of David program, all of the literature, everything is out there trying to give some hope to this world that it's not going to end this way. But one of the things we have to understand is that God is not trying to save anything from this present evil world. It's prophesied to be destroyed, to burn with fire. And God will bring in his wonderful new, everything new, wonderful world tomorrow. God's true church is about to go and keep the fall holy days, the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, which includes a fast. And then we move on into the much anticipated Feast of Tabernacles. And then it all wraps up with the last great day. Will you be at God's fall holy day festivals? Will you be at services? Will you be fasting on atonement? Are you coming to the feast? I came across this report. This is from 1982. It's from the Worldwide News, which was kind of like a newspaper to members about what the work was doing. This is obviously under the leadership of Herbert Armstrong. It says, begin now to focus your mind on the most joyous 8 days of the year to be anticipated and enjoyed by the largest number of people to be gathered at any convention assembled for any festival on earth. In 1982, the number of people keeping the Feast of Tabernacles made it the largest convention on earth. That's staggering to think about. That was in 1982. What is that? Almost 40 years ago. You'd expect things to grow. You'd expect it to still have that kind of a reputation. But sadly, it hasn't. Sadly, people lost interest. They were consumed by problems. There's a lot of reasons. God is using this work to remind all of us that we really need to be part of the feast. We really need to continue in this education. God wants you there. God wants me there. He wants us to be part of it. And if you're not, you need to really study and pray. And I suggest you make contact with the Philadelphia Church of God, that you request a visit, that you start to work your way through issues, and hopefully, prayerfully, become part of God's true church. In that same Olivet prophecy, this is verses 29 through 32 of Luke chapter 21. That same prophecy, Christ says, as he spoke to them a parable, he said, "Behold, the fig tree and all the trees, when they now shoot forth, you see and know of your own selves that summer is now near at hand. So likewise you, when you see these things come to pass, know you that the kingdom of God is near at hand. Truly I say unto you, this generation shall not pass away till all be fulfilled." Do we see that in the world today? The trees prove, the world events prove the kingdom of God is just about here. You can't deny it. How would you solve any of the problems out there? COVID is a real sickness, and it goes after those that are weakened, either from a long life, perhaps a long, healthy life, but it also attacks those that are struggling with health issues too. They're at a higher risk. How do you solve those problems? It's contagious. I don't question that at all. And you get people together in a group, and contagious sickness does spread. How do you solve the social issues that we're looking at? The family issues? How do you solve the military issues? How many other ports or commercial locations around the world are storing tons of ammonium nitrate or other dangerous chemicals? How do you solve it? Where do you put all of it? Do we just gather it all together and blow it all up? How are we going to solve these problems? Well, if you come to the Feast of Tabernacles, if you draw close to God, he gives you the solutions. You know, the response to our program, the income to the work, all of it's on the increase. We're having record response. We continue to add more and more programming. We're doing all that we can to share this hope, and a lot of people seem to be listening. I hope you're one of them. I hope you're acting on what God has given you. There is hope. I don't have a whole lot of time here, but I wanted to read you just a few statements from Mr. Armstrong. And these were made in the last year of his life. This is from March 1985. He said, "For the past 3 months, I've been hard at work on a new book, the largest and most important book since the Bible." Do you know what book that is? It's Mystery of the Ages. Most important book since the Bible. Do you have a copy of Mystery of the Ages? If you're not able to keep the Feast of Tabernacles or the Holy Days with God's church, maybe you could focus your time on studying that material. He talks about all of these mysteries that are being opened up in this book, and he said it would even be an eye-opener to the members in the church. He said, "God has called us out of the world. The world was kidnapped by Satan at the time of Adam's temptation. For 8 days we shall enjoy a foretaste of the coming new world of God, a world of peace, happiness, joy, and abundance. Do we really understand that this is not God's world? It is Satan's world. But have we not, most of us, let so much Protestantism rub off on us that we just sort of take it for granted that this is God's world, his civilization?" He says this is Satan's civilization and always has been. And he wraps up this letter by saying Jesus came to start a different world, an entirely new civilization that will be God's world. We'll hear messages about that in specific detail and how God is going to bring it about. It's not just a fairy tale. It's not just wishful thinking. If you study your Bible, God gives us a definite plan on how he's going to make that happen. And, you know, the biggest part of it is Christ returning and then locking up Satan. Satan is responsible for this world. It's his. He's got it right where he wants it. He's the God of this world. He loves the strife and contention. He loves to stir all of this up. It should be so obvious that this is his world. A few months later, Mr. Armstrong was giving a sermon to the church on the day of Pentecost that explains why God has called us now. And he looked out the membership and he even included the ministry and said, I just fear you don't get it. I'm paraphrasing here. He said he could speak all day long to the church. And he was afraid they just wouldn't get it. We are here. We are called now to learn, to be taught. To be taught what? Taught how to lead. Taught how to set an example in godly living, to be teachers, to be the family of God, to teach by family. God has called us to prepare for that. That's why we're here, and that's what we should be doing today. We need to go to the Feast of Tabernacles. We need this education and instruction. One final quote here from a letter that he wrote just 3 weeks before he died. He said, I hope you will realize the seriousness of the time in which we live and that nothing is important any longer other than to be close to God and assured of a place in his very soon coming kingdom. This world is not God's world, and of that we may all be thankful. It is now in its very last days. This illness, he was just about to die, remind you, this illness has impressed heavily on my mind more than ever before the uselessness of this present evil world. Do we recognize how useless this world is? Is there anything in this world that you want to take into the future, that you want to give to your children or your grandchildren? Anything? You know there's not. God created us with the purpose to become God, to build and grow and to be family, to enjoy life. And he paid quite a price to make that possible. Jesus Christ gave up his divinity and became a human being and was sacrificed to pay the penalty for our sins, to free us from our captor. That price has been paid. God's plan does move forward, and the overwhelming majority will choose God's way. In Galatians chapter 1 and verse 3, it says, Grace be to you and peace from God the Father and our Lord Jesus Christ, who gave himself for our sins. Why did he do that? That he might deliver us from this present evil world, according to the will of God our Father. That's what Christ did. That's God's plan for us. He doesn't want this present evil world to continue. He will not allow it to. It will come to its prophesied end at the right time. To leave you with a little hope today, I just want to read one more passage from Revelation chapter 21. And I want you to think about the reality. God doesn't want us to live in a world like we're living in today. Revelation 21 verse 4 says, And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow, nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. And he that sat upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said unto me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. This is the truth. This comes from God. It's faithful. You can have confidence in this future. There is a time coming when there won't be unemployment and death and frustration and irreparable damage. There's a time coming when there won't be any more pain, crying, or sorrow. It's a promise from God. He's going to make everything new. Everything is about to change. Everybody is about to receive this hope and peace and prosperity. This is what we're going to picture at the coming fall holy days. This is why we're here, why we're called into this truth. We are called to become God. We are called to share this message of hope with mankind, and that's our focus. That's why we go to great efforts and great expense, honestly, to share this message, because we want everybody to know that this present evil world is about to come to an end. May God speed that day. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a great day off, and I hope you come back tomorrow when your regular host, Mr. Stephen Flurry, returns. This has been the Trumpet Daily radio program.